Seeing that Cyberpunk Edgerunners Season 2 was announced recently, I've decided to do a little review on one of my favourite animes this decade, that being Cyberpunk Edgerunners. Because this anime is a 10-episode masterpiece. And I'll be honest, when I first heard about it from a friend, I did not have high hopes. Because it was only 10 episodes, I was thinking, can it really be that sad? Could it really be that hype? But boy, was I wrong. Because from episode 1, the show is hype. It opens up with this really cool scene of a cyber psycho going absolutely nuts on the police. The first time I watched this scene, I had no idea what was going on. Everything was kind of just throwing me off. The color scheme, the animation, it felt really hard to follow. But looking back, I can appreciate that this hectic start is what the directors had in mind, and it depicts the nature of Night City really well. Moving on, we meet David and his mum, who aren't living in the best conditions, but clearly have a very loving relationship despite their circumstances. We then move into a short montage of David walking to school, which involves a lot of silent storytelling and further highlights the dangers and disgust of Night City. Once he gets to class, it's obvious that he's different from the rest of them. He's the relaxed, cool kid in school, where everyone else is stuck up and thinks that they're better than him because of his less fortunate upbringing. Even the principals of the school recognize that he does not fit in really well, but David doesn't care about all that. He doesn't want to be in this place anyways. But it's this really unbothered attitude David has towards school which causes his mum to get upset with him, because she wants him to be successful. She knows he's smart, and the only way up in Night City for normal people is to climb that corporate ladder and suck up to those in positions of power. But their conversation about his behavior in school gets cut short when some gangs pull a drive-by on the car next to them, and they get caught up in the crossfire. Unfortunately, that car crashes onto them, leading David's mum to have to go to hospital. She has a surgery which goes well, but David isn't able to visit her since they're on the cheaper healthcare plan, which just goes to show that everything in Night City is run by how much money you have. Even simple things can be taken away from you if you haven't got the money. Anyways, David goes back home and finds some cyberware his mum had, which he thinks he'll be able to sell to raise enough money for the rest of his mum's medical bills. But after a phone call, it's looking pretty unlikely. The next day at school, he has a run-in with some bully who absolutely beats the brakes off of him.
This nigga is trash.
I won't lie, man, this scene pissed me off. I wanted David to whoop him, because why is he so obsessed with David being at this school? I guess stuck up people just annoy me. But after this, David goes back to the hospital and finds out his mum died because they took her off healthcare since she couldn't afford it anymore. This to me was one of the most tragic scenes, because it did a good job at showing how less fortunate people are just pushed to the wayside. And when his mum died, there's nobody there to console him. He's all alone with this tablet that just refers to him as a valued customer. It's super dehumanizing. And episode 1 is so good at showing the reality for less fortunate people. Simple things like healthcare are just cut off from you immediately if you can't afford it. You just cannot survive if you haven't got the cash. And what I love most about this episode is the final few minutes. Just the facial expressions David makes throughout here convey so much emotion regarding everything that's just fallen on him, and does a good job of showing a breaking point or a change in the direction of his life, because he knows he can't afford to stay in school anymore, so he knows he's gonna have to turn to a life of crime. And it's that storytelling through facial expressions which this show gets right all the time, which we'll see again later. But after this, David decides to implant the chrome which he found, which is called a Sandevistan, or Sandy for short, and he uses it to get one of the most satisfying get-backs in history. Can we get a round of applause for this? The higher ups at Arasaka Academy see this fight, and obviously he gets expelled for this, but they take an interest in him for his really high tolerance when using the Sandy, as he shows no side effects. We then cut back to David, who is on a train, and this is where we are first introduced to Lucy, who is stealing chips from people. She tries to steal David's, but he uses the Sandy to catch her in the act. They have a little back and forth, but instead of fighting, they team up together to pickpocket more chips, mainly targeting Arasaka corporates. And during this, David uses the Sandy 8 times, which finally catches up to him and he falls unconscious. Lucy gets David some medical help, but when the paramedic realizes that he isn't insured, she tries to steal the Sandevistan as payment. So Lucy breaks her and David out of the van, and there's this cool scene of them riding into oncoming traffic on a stretcher. And it's obvious now that Lucy is like the main love interest. Just look at his eyes. But honestly, I like that they have this dedicated episode of just bonding, because it really does feel like Lucy came into his life at the perfect time, because David truly has nobody left. So what better time to introduce a love interest? She even invites him back to her house, and they have what feels like a romantic date on the moon using a VR headset, or a brain dance, that's what it's called in this world. And the soundtrack that plays here is so beautiful. But it was all a lie, a trap for Lucy to call her group of Edgerunners to steal back the Sandy from David. Lucy, how could you? Nah, but for real, I love the cliffhanger because it was super unexpected. Here I was thinking these guys were really bonding and gonna develop a nice relationship, but nah, that betrayal actually hurt. Anyways, moving on to episode 3, we get introduced to Maine, Dorio, and Pila. David convinced Maine to let him keep the Sandy if he keeps working for him. So Maine sends David on a mission with Lucy and Rebecca to steal navigation data from an Arasaka car, but they screw it up a bit and are forced to steal the car itself. I actually really enjoyed this first mission because David really encapsulates that feeling of being like a level 1 noob in this life, like how he's crashing the car because he's never driven before, and he has to get saved by Maine, who paints the floor with this guy. Another cool thing about this episode is how Maine warns David not to use his team as a crutch, because if he does, he's gonna die. It was a line that really made me think, because I don't see this as Maine's saying he's gonna kill David for trying to lean on him, but that Night City itself is gonna kill him because it's unforgiving to those who cannot fend for themselves. We then get introduced to Faraday, aka Gus Fring. Get it? Because he's voiced by Giancarlo Esposito, who plays Gus Fring. Yeah, dead joke, my fault. But this gives me a chance to talk about Faraday as a villain because he's quite simple, but that doesn't make him bad. What I like most about the dynamic between Faraday and Maine is that Maine is this big brolic guy and Faraday is like the average higher up. Anyways, episode 4 takes place the next day. There's more montage with David and Lucy doing some training together. There's a few missions being done here and there, and David is finally starting to find his place on the team. This episode gave quite a bit of character development to all the characters, and it's definitely starting to feel more like a family. And Maine is like the obvious father figure to David, and they're developing a real friendship. Anyways, the team are all together when they come across this random guy pissing in the street, and Pilar just starts messing with him, but then that guy just goes cyber psycho and blows off his head. This scene caught me so off guard initially, but watching it back, it was hilarious. I forgot how funny Pilar was. And the fight here was super intense, and we get this iconic scene with David looking so cool here. And this was like the proper switch from like, I hope this whole team lives because I like them so much, to I hope at least some of them survive to the end, because the fact that Pilar dies so fast is crazy. Lastly for this episode, David and Lucy have a heartfelt conversation about both of their lives as Edgerunners, and the reason I love this conversation so much is because it revealed their true feelings for one another. Not only in terms of like their feelings, but their fears of how long they're really gonna last in this lifestyle. Because Lucy fears for David, feeling like he is not cut out for this lifestyle and wants him to get out, but David is adamant that he'll be able to take her to the moon one day, and the only way to do that is to stay on the Edgerunner path, because how else is he gonna get money? It's a great scene and it's packed with so much emotion. Moving on to episode 5, the team plan a mission to intercept Jimmy Kurosaki, but it goes left and David gets kidnapped. Jimmy is a specialist in the brain dance scene that I was talking about earlier with VRs, and he traps David in this hyper-realistic dream where he gets killed by Maxtap. This was a really interesting execution on the like, it's just a dream concept from the writers, because even though the brain dance is a sort of dream, they feel so real and have real world influence on those who experience them. Then the team come and save David from Jimmy, and they use Jimmy to go and get Mr. Tanaka, who they need to hold hostage. This episode was pretty good in my opinion. It gave us some super memorable moments, and I love the scene inside the brain dance. That was definitely a highlight for me. I find that whole dreamlike state really engaging whenever it's used. Moving on to episode 6. Honestly, this is one of those episodes that deserves its own video because it's just that good, but pretty much it focuses on Maine and his descent into cyberpsychosis. The episode starts in a desert-like environment, and we see this pre-cyberware and very young looking Maine in the distance, who is on a run to the edge of this deserted place. This is the very start of his cyberpsychosis, and I like the way it's being depicted throughout this episode. It really does a good job of capturing that feeling of isolation and emptiness that a cyberpsycho must feel. After this, we see Maine dipping in and out of cyberpsychosis because it's clear that he hasn't gone fully off the edge yet, but he's losing himself, and because of that he ends up punching Kiwi. And even when David tries to talk some sense into him, he gets mad and he takes offense, which isn't like Maine at all. But time is moving fast. Lucy needs to replace Kiwi before Trauma Team are notified about what they're doing to Mr. Tanaka. But before Lucy can finish the job, Mr. Tanaka wakes up and he starts talking to David, and he tries to convince him to let him free. And I actually think this scene is quite underrated. I like how Mr. Tanaka tries his absolute hardest to convince David that his crew is using him and that he can have a much bigger and brighter future at Arasaka if he just lets him go. But Mr. Tanaka knows that Arasaka would use David and drain him because of his high tolerance when it comes to cyberware. It just paints the picture of hopelessness in Night City, that no matter who you are or where you are or who you hang out with, you're going to be used by somebody else for their benefit. After this, Maine and Dorio come into the room and see Mr. Tanaka wide awake, which is bad news for them because it means Trauma Team could pick up a signal and figure out where they are at any minute. So they pull Lucy out of the deep dive, but unfortunately it's too late for them and Trauma Team have already caught Mr. Tanaka's signal, so they start preparing for the worst. David takes Lucy back to the car so that they can get away while Maine and Dorio deal with Trauma Team and NCPD at the same time. And Lucy tells David that when she was in deep dive she didn't find the data on Mr. Tanaka, but Maine and Dorio keep fighting, and with Maine's dips in and out of cyberpsychosis, it's clear that he's going to lose it any minute now. And that's exactly what happens because Maine shoots Dorio thinking that she was an enemy, which proved to be the last straw for Maine's mental health, and he goes full on cyberpsycho. And what follows from this is one of the best 6 minutes in TV, absolute cinema. Maine just starts killing everyone. I love the switch in his tone of voice after going cyberpsycho when he asks himself, is this mess his fault? And when David finally gets to Maine though, he regains some consciousness for a final goodbye in one of the most heartbreaking ways, because Maine knows that this is the end for him and David wants to save him more than anything. He can't lose Maine like this. The storytelling through emotion combined with the depiction of Maine's cyberpsycho is just such a perfect end to this episode and cements the idea that Edgerunners are remembered by how they die, not by how they live. The soundtrack used here is also perfect, and the scene after the fight is just as perfect. I know David's face became a meme, but I don't care. Anyways, episode 7 takes place sometime after. I'm not really sure how long it's been, but considering how much bigger and chromed out David is, I have to assume it's been like a few months months or maybe even up to a year, cause bro looks like he's slotted every chrome on the market. Plus he's got built-in cyber weapons just like Maine did. Anyways, David goes to link up with Faraday to discuss some business cause Faraday wants to see if David is ready to work at the same level as Maine. Then David goes to talk with Lucy and try to get her back on the team, but she won't do it. And Lucy doesn't tell David this, but she knows that Arasaka wants David because of his high tolerance for cyberware, and they want him to test the cyber skeleton. So Lucy has been killing everyone at Arasaka who knows about David and deleting the info on him. And from episode 8, things get a bit confusing, so let me just pause and explain what's really gonna go down. Faraday is working for Militech, who is Arasaka's biggest rival in the cyberware scene, but Faraday is plotting behind the scenes to side with Arasaka because he's greedy and he wants power. So his plan right now to climb the corporate ladder is to 1. Acquire Lucy, who has been hiding info on David from Arasaka, and 2. Find a way to get David in the cyber skeleton because it's a prototype and David is the only one who can handle it because of his high tolerance to cyberware. In the meantime, David is starting to lose himself a bit. He's starting to hallucinate and show symptoms of potentially going cyber psycho. And I think this is a good time to pause and talk about how it's clear that David is going to go down the same path as Maine. He still thinks he's the special one. He thinks he's the best out there when it comes to handling chrome, but he's just another pawn in the game the megacorps are playing. He's pushing his own body to the limits, thinking that he's chasing after the dreams of those who he's left behind. But those dreams exist to serve the higher ups at Arasaka or Militech. And right now, David is on track to just become another cautionary tale to those who think they're special. Anyways, back to the plot. Lucy goes to kill some more Netrunners at Arasaka, but this time she gets trapped because Faraday bribed Kiwi to help him set up Lucy. In episode 9, Faraday sends David and the crew on a mission to intercept some Arasaka cargo. They're able to pull it off and open up the cargo to find the cyber skeleton. This, however, was all a part of Faraday's plan, and the mission was set up to force David into a position where he has to use the cyber skeleton. And Faraday was able to pull this off because he's still working for Militech, so he was able to send Militech mercs and soldiers out there to fight David when he puts the cyber skeleton on. This plan was like a final screw you to Militech and a display of his loyalty to Arasaka. And because of the kind of person David is, he would sacrifice himself to save his crew, and the only way to do that right now is to equip himself with the cyber skeleton. So he does that and he just starts killing everyone. But nah, this was one of my favorite scenes in the whole show, seeing David as a one-man army rip through all these Militech soldiers, and the part before where he rages at Faraday was super intense as well. This episode was so peak. But now we move on to the finale. David and the crew decide they're gonna kill Faraday and save Lucy, so they head straight for Arasaka HQ. Arasaka is trying to recover the cyber skeleton on the way, but David is just killing everyone, and he's currently dipping in and out of cyber psychosis on the way, but that's not gonna stop him. Kiwi links up with Faraday to try and get her payout for her work, but Faraday double crosses her since she knows about the cyber skeleton. David's rampage gets marked as a cyber psycho incident, but because his situation is so severe, Arasaka call in Adam Smasher to put a stop to David, and their final showdown is actually incredible. I love when Adam Smasher says, "Can you really afford distractions now?" Because David was getting distracted by Faraday getting away with Trauma Team, that he forgot who he really came here to save. But in the end, he's able to save Lucy, but loses in a fight against Adam Smasher, who then kills David. And as much as I'm sad the story ended this way, it's still such a perfect ending to the story. Anyways, Cyberpunk Edgerunners is perfect. The animation is super unique. I love the color palette. The soundtrack as well is so good. They did not miss on a single song. My personal favorite is Maine's Death soundtrack and I Really Want to Stay at Your House. This show touches on deep themes of corporate greed and exploitation so well. Everybody exists to serve their best interests, and that's why Night City is so unforgiving to people who try and lean on others. That was one of the first lessons Maine taught to David, because if he saw them as a crutch to lean on, he'd find out the hard way how ruthless his life would be for him. And lastly, I like how David has never really had time to mourn the loss of people closest to him. Night City moves too fast for all that. It's truly a tragic story with so much depth for such a short show. It's honestly so impressive, and I'd be crazy to give this anything less than a 10 out of 10. But that's pretty much it for this video. If you have any recommendations for other shows I should watch, let me know in the comments. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.